In this portion of the presentation, we'll look at the intended contribution that the authors seek to make, as well as the methodology that Wasko and Faraj used to carry out their research project. First, the key contribution. Wasko and Faraj's key contribution is the extension of a model of social capital proposed by Nahapiet and Ghoshal in 1998. They seek to extend this model from organizations, as the earlier authors did, to electronic networks of practice, the focus of Wasko and Faraj's work. Nahapiet and Ghoshal identified 4 components to social capital. Those are individual motivation, structural capital, cognitive capital, and relational capital. Wasko and Faraj represent each of those components in the context of the electronic network of practice they investigate with 7 different elements. First of all, individual motivation is represented by the desire to enhance professional reputation and the desire to help others. Structural capital is represented by network centrality, the increased regularity of contact with other members of a group that supports collective action. Cognitive capital is represented by expertise, how much one knows about one's field, and tenure, how long one has been working in that field. And finally, in the social capital model, relational capital is represented by commitment to the network, the sense that a member has that the network matters and that the member wants the network to continue to exist, needs it to continue to exist, and reciprocity, a member's sense of mutual indebtedness toward fellow network members. The authors seek to test whether each of these 7 features contributes to more contributions in a network of practice and to more helpful contributions in a network of practice. The authors collected data from a 7,000-member legal professional association that maintains a web-based electronic network of practice, message boards. They examined an exhaustive 4-month sample of message postings to obtain data on contributions. The authors then combined this data with demographic data provided by the sponsoring association and survey data provided by willing members. All survey measures came from previous studies, so the authors are fairly confident that what they're measuring has been measured in similar fashions by previous authors who have validated their findings. The authors found, with the survey they distributed, that the representativeness among survey respondents, there were 173, or 29% of total individuals they originally sent surveys to, the representativeness there was pretty good in participation rates, gender, age, and employment. In other words, the people from whom they received surveys had similar characteristics with the overall population, at least in terms of how frequently they participated on the network of practice, in terms of the male-female breakdown, in terms of the different age groups represented, and even in terms of employment, whether the numbers who work for large firms versus small firms. The only real difference in representativeness among the self-selecting respondents was that those who bothered to send their surveys in tended to have a higher level of experience than did the general membership. Here we see the model proposed by Wasko and Faraj, the model they seek to test in this research project. Essentially, we see the 7 elements listed on the previous page, the representations of individual motivations, of social structural capital, of cognitive capital, and of relational capital. And from each one of those, a hypothesis, 7 altogether, saying that each one of these elements should contribute to knowledge contribution. And we'll note that the authors look at knowledge contribution in 2 ways, as we'll see on the next slide. But before I flip that, I want to point out here that even though we see 7 hypotheses, 7 arrows, Wasko and Faraj are really testing 14 sub-hypotheses. They break each one of these hypotheses down into determining, for instance, does reputation enhance knowledge contribution, the amount, and does reputation enhance the knowledge contribution in terms of its value, its helpfulness? So really there are 14 sub-hypotheses being tested here. 2 forms of contribution, both quantity and quality, being tested for each one of the independent variables. As I said, the dependent variable of knowledge contribution is being measured in 2 ways. Wasko and Faraj look at quantity in terms of the number of messages posted, just a straight count. Wasko and Faraj also look at the quality of the knowledge contributions, which they represent here as helpfulness. They concoct a 1 to 4 scale, numerical scale, 1 meaning not helpful, 4 meaning very helpful. And then what Wasko and Faraj do, they do take an initial subset of 100 messages and test them for intercoder reliability. One of the authors rated each of those messages for helpfulness, and a domain expert from the sponsoring association carried out the same process with the same 100 messages. Wasko and Faraj found that the ratings were reliable between them and the domain expert, and so for the remaining many hundreds of messages, they simply had one of the authors handle the coding for that remaining bulk of messages. From the resulting messages, the authors calculated an average helpfulness rating for each network participant. That, along with the volume of contributions from each participant, is how the authors are measuring the dependent variable of knowledge contribution. In the next portion of the presentation, we'll take a look at the results Wasko and Faraj obtained.